Right, hello everybody. Welcome to the farm. My guest tonight is Aug Tellez. Aug, how you doing, man?
I'm pretty good. How about you?
Great. I'm good. I'm good. Been trying to study your stuff and wrap my head around it, frankly. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, because I just ask everybody kind of in this field and the related ones, particularly like secret space program and stuff. I just wanted to ask you from my listeners, where do you get your information and where can people tie down perhaps documentation or proof of the stuff you talk about?
It really depends. Depends on your own background and how much you're paying attention. What I would usually say is the only real proof that is required is the whatever you see in industry, and I hate to tie it down to politics and industry and government and things like that because that's not really where it's centralized, although in the same sense it is. But wherever you see corruption happening there, that's the important part of the message. It's just, really the hardest part to believe about this message is the fact that there's such widespread corruption that is basically living in the crevices of the earth and has been dominating the masses through multi-layered mind control to the point where they've separated from what we consider the actual, population surface civilization for an untold amount of years and developed their own currency, administrative powers, and advanced technology that is beyond, capabilities of fathoming and belief for most of the people out here. But beyond that, there's also another kind of discrepancies because with that type of power, if a person, the only way we have the ability to have people speak out and describe these things is because somebody involved wants people to do it. If it was completely across the board decided that no one on the surface level civilization should know about these things, then we would only have a sneaking suspicion that something is wrong. There are
Right.
spiritual capabilities and remote viewing and DNA activation and stuff like that, but I don't really like to get into that fully other than at least grounding it through technology because a lot of this stuff was developed in the military and with the even then with the degree of control they have we can still figure things out but and there so I'll try and wrap this up. I usually say that and basically I've been shown through something that happened with me all the proof that I needed, including the strangely mundane and orderly side of it involving paperwork and all types of background, specialists, technicians, operatives, and things like that. Where it connects with people is a kind of control system that is based upon our secrecy and vulnerability. But there is a whole side of it that's basically extremely controlled and paper trails, things like that. But a person won't see it until there's a specific need for it, and everyone that does see it bears a burden of pretty much having to choose how they're going to live in a world where they know that type of stuff is happening.
Right. Yeah, I see what you're saying. So it's kind of like that, the conflict within the deep state, and however that exists outside of the parameters of the state allows us. There's some people who want aspects of this, like in the UFO game, to come out, and so that conflict allows for sort of a tectonic shift that allows a little bit of information to come out to those who have eyes and ears to observe it. Would you say
Right.
that's fair? Okay.
Right, and it's
Cool,
like
cool.
a kind of slippery slope towards an overwhelming amount of secrecy and control the more one knows about it. Until the point where I'm telling you that I have seen proof, but I've also been through heavily, what you call trauma-based mind control, which is a lot of what I talk about and a lot of what drives me to talk about it. But again, even then, that's pretty much at the support of the program itself. So it's a strange situation.
Right, and whatever
That's the
your
best.
memory allows personally, I suppose.
Um, Well, they put you for a particular process of the awakening. They put you in this big device, which I've been in many times, and there's usually multiple different uses from travel and remote viewing things. And then they have to clear all the programming, all the alters, what are called alters, and all the traumatic memory or memory that is hidden behind amnesia gaps have to be removed. Otherwise, eventually the personality, the consciousness breaks down completely at a certain point. And
Right.
and you can believe what you want, and I can believe what I want as far as uh, deception from there on, which there always is, even when it's all displayed on the table because of how it's presented, which is just what has been going on for thousands of years. And that's just, if a person gets to that point.
Yeah, yeah, and then
As
there's always confusing media, which kind of distorts, even for somebody personally, after watching so many shows or movies or video games, sort of what they want someone to remember about what trauma-based mind control is, or how the time travel works, or anything like that, as far as I understand it.
it will, at a point that spirituality and religion is like the ultimate propaganda over the years. When we get to predictive programming, that is subtly inducing change and kind of laying into future states for people, setting them up for things that are going to happen later on. But a lot of it is distinctly accurate to what has happened. For instance, I can say you are right, but for instance, that will be used in a way of programming a person. They'll create for like some of these My Labs events. They'll create what are literally straight out of TV shows. It'll be recreated to induce a type of dissociation or out of body state and draw out of the person information or just whatever answer and personality is going to manifest in them if they were in a situation where they're in an abduction or on another planetary environment, or in a space colony or something like that. But the
Right.
weirdest thing is, out of all of these deceptions, these false awakenings and explanations, the real reality is 100% the whole picture. It's all of them, and it's beyond that because there's breakaway civilizations involved, and that's pretty much it. Stretches our imagination as far as it can go because of what's involved with it. Like all of our fiction is just a fragment of what has actually gone on.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it gets really confusing, since 2017, certainly where we are now. I like to use the example, like in Total Recall, everybody is familiar for the most part with the film and its themes. So then anyone coming out and talking about a civilization on Mars or time travel or replacing memories or any of those aspects, someone's going to blow them off and say, oh, well, you're just exaggerating the details of the one film as opposed to all this other information that, is trying to breach the surface about Mars or about a breakaway.
Right, and but you also have to wonder, and this is the way a lot of these programs, or just this hidden layer of information across the board, across of everything throughout time, would those people be different whether that was there or not anyway? And so then it
Right.
becomes a question of what is the influence, literally to this timeline, this world line, if we're going to go that far, in with having the presence, that information there. And there's got to be a percent that it's there in a way to store information about what is taking place so that it can't be lost forever. Because imagine, so I'll talk a little bit back. I want to rewind a second on you're looking at the paperwork and proof and things like that. And so this comes down to a legality issue, and it goes down to basically the way the entire society, the system is working. We're not going off of what we consider to be the Constitution right now. There are multiple constitutions at play, and the majority of them are private to the public. Public can't access them. Beginning layers of the government, or what we consider the public government, Senate and Congress, things like that, they can so it's the strangest thing. They run in a way the law, they in a way they run the executive government, but every one of them is in a way chosen and targeted at the same time for a specific purpose, and they get paid a lot of money. That's why there's so much money involved in all of these, even these, what I've found out, within the past few years, mainly through what is called the awakening, that a lot of them, for instance, it'd be as simple as declassifying certain unacknowledged special access programs or really special access programs that lead into removing secret laws or private laws that are almost like commercial or corporate laws that are limiting certain departments of the government from liberating certain knowledge from certain projects. It's literally tangled up like that, basically like the rules to a board game, but it's because of money and basically blackmail and straight on like pressure from basically like covert groups. And you mentioned the shadow government, and I was shown and introduced and many things in this variety of ways that ultimately come down to like these weird rituals that have gone on for the longest time to a lot of people. And apparently there's no main government. What we see is broken up into two or three groups, and there's the shadow government, and there's another one that goes by another name, and I believe there was you could say another one, and then you could say there are groups that are within these families. And where it's basically worth mentioning, there are what you could call white hats, or people who are working secretly to help humanity. And from there, it all goes crazy because what was developed in terms of cloning and memory alteration is a way to involve change, to carry out operations without people even knowing that they're being used to carry them out. And so this could be used for good or bad. And it's really the only time you could have a situation like that, because the way the situation works in every other situation, basically before that, is complete exposure and vulnerability to people who are only interested in the money. Basically, with the breakaway civilization, there's infinite amount of resources, and so you get groups that could actually make a change at that point. And right now it's split between white hats and black hats, and it's always been that way, but apparently in the past few years it's been inching towards what you would call white hats having control of these systems that could change the world, possibly end the world, or even alter the flow of time if you want to go that far, which I've seen either illusions and simulated reality that can completely mimic rewinding time and just multiple varieties of temporal distortion control, or they've developed these technologies long ago and they just happened to get into the people who had the most money.
Okay, yeah, I got you on that.
Sorry
Okay,
to
cool.
ramble.
Well, oh no, no, not at all, man. That was all very interesting. So how I'm gonna flip around how I was gonna ask these questions here, but how were you selected to get the data from the various USAPs and my labs, or how did you get involved, I suppose, with the physical level of being able to see this and sort of having an in on the secret projects,
It
if
started
you
when I
can.
was so here's the basic premise. It started when I was young, and when usually it starts years before I was involved, which I'm not really sure how everything seemed to carry on from there. But from that, in a similar fashion, a strange synchronistic kind of offset or out of sync fashion. But from there it gets weird because when you talk about things kind of spiraling or fractalizing or patterning out from there, things get like a hall of mirrors where they could possibly be there could be some type of system of illusions involved, not to mention the literal cube or a hexagramical technology that kind of mirrors your own perceptions until you build up this psychic fractal horizon into infinity of perception, and it kind of drowns you in it in a way, whether that's subtle over many years, kind of by pulling the dreams and the creativity out of people, or whether that's through some strange experience beyond that, or a hell or something like that. um but so the idea is, for most people it's like this as well. It begins, and because I was involved in what is known as the time program, and there are many people involved in that, but not many people, at least at this point, speaking out. There's supposed to be more, at least what I was told, by between 2020 and 2023, and there's a whole bunch of information to go with that. But basically, because I was involved in that program, but it works the same with everyone that's been through trauma-based mind control of high degrees, where time becomes distorted from that factor alone. But the machines that are used, the techniques and the situations, basically consciousness transfer, it either manipulates or naturally follows the curves and like routes of time and history or consciousness or whatever it is, hyperspace, that there are basically time. It just represents relativity and localities of kind of a singularized or collective relativity within itself, within other measures or spectrums of other levels of that. So it's basically like bubbles within bubbles within bubbles of varying to infinite degrees. And so the perception of that is as if I don't know how to put it, but it's lifetimes of information and experiences within lifetimes, and it goes on from there. So basically, once you get involved, you don't know. It happens so fast, if you could say it like that, or the way the technology and what begins as hypnotism and like perceptual feedback and measurement and things like that, and psychological emotional response and association, and turns into ultimately consciousness control and manipulation and trancing and information transfer. And then beyond that, so there's an explanation that is both for secrecy, so a person will not literally know, which can be for a variety of things, for the basis, the default that anybody that goes against the system that's developed kind of underneath humanity, kind of like a fungus, if you will, but not quite, because you could say the same thing about both versions, or upper and lower, or underground and private and secret, and surface humanity in certain ways. But any variation from that usually meant in complete, in utter destruction by the controlling powers. So for one, you would think most people using this type of technology and mind control and memory manipulation would be purely for evil, which, very well for many years, and that's possibly the entire time that's what it was used for, or maybe, even since the beginning they were used for both. But if it were used for both, that's a possibility, is all I'm saying. And but I was brought in apparently through schooling. There's projects that search I guess they just search for certain personality traits and things like that, and maybe test scores. And there was a few other situations that were fairly odd, and I learned later were for this. And with that, there were always memories. I always experienced what I call bleed-throughs, but are basically breakdowns or failure in the programming to succinctly and successfully shield one's conscious personality that is interacting, day to day with the experiences that only happen under specific trances or in specific situations, behind specific triggers. And there are initial experiences that are literally physical, meaning they have to get DNA. And it's a literal process, but as soon as it begins, there's memory wiping techniques involved, and serums, and ultimately programming and triggers. And then from there, there's involvement with cloning and consciousness transfer, and the highest degrees of trauma-based mind control to completely create an amnesic memory block. But there were always events where I remembered, and so throughout history, of my personal history, and apparently a lot more than that, there were events where the stuff hit the fan and full on whatever you want to call it, basically non-human entities, interdimensional or intergalactic battles of consciousness, whatever you want to call it, would happen in broad daylight. And it would, a lot of the times, or 99.9% of the times, unless it was like a small little group of the population that was to see it and remember, everybody would usually get their memories wiped, and everyone would carry on as if nothing happened, even if literally like a non-human entity just like walked out down the street or through a bus through a wall or something.
Right. So kind of like the Men in Black idea where, you would take the given people involved in a scenario and erase or obscure their memories of that event.
Yeah, things like that. And so I've learned I sat down and have had tea with them, you can say metaphorically, by now and within the past 10 years. And these are multiple groups, or, I met them all. But all throughout, from 9 to 17, there were things like that going on. And as well, these experiences at sleep of being basically contacted and drawn out of the body, starting with this experience of when I was very young, and I figured out the first form of magic I ever found out I could do, in the most satisfying way, at least. I like doing, as a kid, magic in front of people anyway, or two, like actual stuff, but lucid dreaming. And it like tripped me out to the max. And I was a little kid. I knew this was like something kids don't talk about. This is something adults in school don't talk about. If they do, it'll be something like, that's normal, it happens, but, it doesn't happen often. It's not, important in that sense. When for me, I felt like it told so much about reality and consciousness and disciplining the mind and some type of biomechanical feature of going numb from like meditating into your body, falling asleep, basically. I stay up late and then fall asleep very quickly, so you don't get distracted consciously. Your mind doesn't get distracted consciously, and you get this numb feeling rocking out of your body. After that numb feeling turns into this like wavering, paperish feeling, but keeping the rocking steady, so there's a certain frequency that elevates until it becomes like a sound, and it just all you can feel and hear. Then eventually you just pop out of your body into this other state, this altered state. And I've talked about this on the radio before, if anybody has or hasn't heard it. But I woke up in an underground base, and I noticed at one time, 3, 4, 5, 6, some amount of times later after lucid dreaming, and it was the first time in a dream I felt ground and gravel under my feet, and it was, I don't know, you're something. Basically, I had a brain in my dream, not a body that is just my conscious or my subconscious mind creating a brain or in a body for me to experience a virtual system. It was a real one, and there's like a slight degree of adrenaline once I woke up, just a little bit, and once that happens, you can't distinguish that or you can't confuse that for a dream or not. And I had a little experience, an event with 2 guards seeing me, and then me getting stuck for a second because there was a satellite beamed at me, which is the same one that apparently draws kids there in their astral or psychic form, but it's basically like astral when it comes into a certain degree of technological manifestation. And got stuck for a second, and then kind of focused and woke myself up because I was good at doing that at a certain point, and then got the sensation of this psychic impression of like, crap, basically. And there were 2 consciousness, two minds in the room with me, and I realized somehow some technological accomplishment or degree of projection, satellite, consciousness with the mind or whatever, that they had followed me to my house and my room where my body was. But I also realized that experience was most likely more important than I thought. I didn't really have time to too much time to think about it, because I got the feeling of like, oh yeah, you're done for. Like, we got you now from the beings or the consciousness, whatever it was, the soldiers. And then they evaporated and were gone. I'm pretty sure I actually screamed for my parents at that point, and like broke up the situation to make sure nothing weird would happen anymore. But it was, it was curtains from there.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really close friends with Alara Blackwell for a while. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she was one of the super soldiers when the term first sort of arose on the scene, and nobody was really happy with the term. But sort of James Rink and Max Spears and trying to think of James Casbolt and all these people were making the rounds on Camelot for the first time. And Alara shared a few experiences with me that were just remarkably close to what you just said as far as astral projecting or lucid dreaming and it being caught up in some sort of like AI matrix and finding herself in an underground base and then um, the awareness of other beings or guard types immediately, shocked her and they saw her and she saw them. And then that kind of panic, shot her back into her body. They were very, very close to what you were saying there. That's very interesting. As far as how many remote viewers and people involved in the Super Soldier program report being able to travel out of body and then winding up in these underground bases, and then there being some sort of way to capture the soul or at least observe it or something while it's there, and possibly follow it back to its point of origin or where your physical body is. So just kind of changing subject real quick. How far along do you think the cloning centers are, and who besides celebrities use these facilities? And do you think that some of the you can answer, I mean, I could re-ask this because I know I'm asking a lot of things at once, but do you consider some of the YouTube videos of like celebrities sort of malfunctioning, there's no better word for it, where they just sort of get stuck or they're staring off into space or whatever, proof of these clones malfunctioning or proof that they're clones at all?
Go back to military protocol and scientific protocol, and proof is if you have something that's undeniable by the majority of people who experience the evidence, basically. Proof and evidence is determined through taking scientific study, research, and creating or designing tests or experiments to carry out and test your hypothesis.
Right.
So proof, is what you want to make of it at that point. That we're not going to really get anything like that.
Right,
But
it's a
if you
wrong
want to
word,
be,
so
if you want, it's a strong word, yeah, but it's also it's direct, and we can, that's helpful in a lot of variety of ways. But if you want to look at common sense, we have, and this is kind of what I was hinting at before, as far as corruption, we have enough to know that fundamentally something is wrong. And if we really look deep, kind of getting into new agey stuff with quantum mechanics, but more so just a general processing of philosophy and asking the question, why, and it kind of falls back to the basics of finance and politics and how things work, which can also be explained away as human behavior and hedonism and things like that. But that there's some things that we don't know about the system of life here and the possibilities of the totality of what's happening. And I don't mean life on other planets, but I mean how our soul and our consciousness and DNA and biology and mechanics and technology, and how all of this really combines with the bigger picture, is basically the beginning and end and the source of all this and the true nature of how things work that we don't know. And so there's a degree of what we don't know that we should know in terms of corruption, and there's a degree of what we don't know that it's not necessarily that we should know, uh, and it's not necessarily that it's our fault in the sense that we don't know, although it might be confusing you here, but it gets real weird in terms of belief systems today and the belief systems that pretty much dominate in these secret societies, the breakaway civilization, these private groups, and the similarities or distinctions, differences with public spirituality, religions, trends, memes, and groupthink, and how it all ties together. Usually, you have these beliefs that are based on spirituality and power. Like, it's the strangest thing. It's militarized spirituality, if you will. But that goes into a lot. I want to go back to your previous question as far as, because in the end, if you need proof and you're determined to find it, you'll find enough information that validates your experiences and any research that you can do honestly. And I can't sit there and, take a person through it and say, honestly, you haven't BS'd yourself or jumped the gun or anything like that. But I also have my own experiences, and it's up to ourselves to be honest with us, with each other and ourselves, and that's a subjective thing. But it's only because all the objective, pure evidence, craft or weaponry or papery, paper trails and all that. I don't know what I'm saying there. But it's locked away in underground base. But the strange thing is, if you were a senator getting paid $500,000 a year, you would know there are secret projects working on supposed alien technology, machinery, or at the basis just mind control BS stuff to control the population more, because either the population is crazy and zombified and needs to be controlled, or is heading towards some ultimate end that is being staved off, or because the rich and the powerful need to stay in power and want control, and from there it's up to you. But that's the strange and surprising part of it, that it's closer than you think. And even with celebrities or news personnel, common house names and personnel, these people know either that it's a show and there's these created beings or mind technology, virtual reality, whatever you want to call it, from the wealthy elite, that there's a bit ways to live for a very long time, and there's ways to basically use the blood of young test subjects or whatever you want to call it, clones or population to live for a very long time. And that's public knowledge at this point, but it's also been knowledge for the longest time, just nobody would believe it. There are there were queens that bathed in baby's blood, and it's now public knowledge. So it was done for the longest of time, and cannibalism and all that goes back. But even that degree of stuff going on, you'd be surprised how many people you see throughout the day, if you connect with any of this, what we call civilized society, that are literally right in the mix of that. I can get back to the cloning and all that stuff if you want.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that just to add a little footnote to that, I think that all the senators and the people in high echelons of power are paid that much, and then the extent of the compartmentalization is such that they all have an in on one little aspect. They may know about, the Project Ibis or whatever, the technology to live forever, or they may know about an aspect of the secret space program or an aspect of sort of global mind control, but then they're paid that much and they're blackmailed and they're shoved in this corner where they can't make many moves themselves, and they only have a small piece of the puzzle that they in fact think is the entire puzzle. So they continue believing and following a belief system where they think they're the most elite of the elite. They think they're at the top of the pyramid, but really they're all just given this small little piece in order to believe that. They're not actually, every senator and congressperson isn't walking around with a working knowledge of post-Nazi projects, aliens, off planet bases and things like that. They all just have an aspect of it to feel that special. But to go sort of in detail with the clones and stuff, there's a lot of videos circulating around YouTube, as I had mentioned, but the two that always come to mind that are the most bizarre to me are one with Eminem and another one with Al Roker. Now, Eminem just pauses and stares off into space, and there's these two sports commentators that keep trying to bring him back to the real world, and he seems stuck like a robot, but I also think he's capable of joking and method acting something really weird if he wanted to. without Roker, there's a phrase that's from like some sort of Christian Christmas 50s song or something that another reporter says. It's just like the light of God or the holiness of Mother Mary or something like that. It's a little phrase, and right when
Save
she
some
says it,
turkey for the Holy Spirit or something about the turkey dinner or some crap. I heard that one. I remember.
yeah, something about the light of the Holy Spirit or whatever in that. And right when she says that part, light of the Holy Spirit, he clicks out and he doesn't come back and he's just completely out there and stuck. And that to me is evidence of, either a severe problem on on him as an individual or, the sort of monarch altar switching phraseology at work right in front of our eyes. But yeah, that's basically what I was getting at. Do you think that's part of the clone thing, or do you think that's something else?
So you said a lot. I've had a weird experience throughout the whole entirety of it. And so that is called circumstantial evidence, where if you can get enough with excuse me, you can feel I don't know, secure in telling yourself that there's something worth researching. But we can't really, use that to really convince anybody, the skeptics basically. And that's kind of just a
Right.
cop out. But I'm just, hoping you don't waste your time, because if enough people see that, then the people who know will know, but the people aren't that don't know aren't going to know, and the people who know but want to pretend they don't, and kind of split the population up through that, aren't going to change, even if they're one of them, if you will. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's a setup to, it's like plausible deniability, the way everything is set up, and that's part of how it's all set up. But for me, the first one you mentioned, and I'm not going to clarify, has been around for a long time and knows of the system, knows who he is and what he is, and so on. And there's part of the process that has to do with biology and mechanics of biology that involves a fast switching phase, if you will, to upkeep the biological replicants, if you want. The second one, I saw that event live 10 years ago, which doesn't make any sense, I know. And they told me that was them was half having fun and half the part of the breakdowns that occurs. And there's part of me being shown and explained everything as if everything was its own topic in an encyclopedia of, 600 to 6,000 pages. And it took a week to go through each one. And there was a series of encyclopedias, maybe a shelf or a bookcase or a library, and it was very strange and it took an eternity. But for instance, a lot of people you could mention were there and have been doing that for relatively thousands of years, through a population, through this hive mind collective that is created, that kind of began long ago through an ancient supercomputer system that can detach itself from matter, if you will, and store itself in folded away higher or alternate dimensions, and basically picks up power by coming down to the physical population, if you will, and drawing people up into its hive mind collective over the years. But that's I'm going to go back into your first, if you will, questions in the previous comments before, as far as some of these senators and blackmail and stuff like that. And I was apparently, surprising degree. I thought it would just be money and power, but a surprising degree want to help the world, the universe. They think there's something that has to be done. They make the proper sacrifices, put themselves in the positions to do that. And I don't mean any weird terminology with the use of the word sacrifice there. Just they
Mhm.
work hard for that, at least in the
No, I
ways
see.
they think are working hard. As far as going to a expensive enough school, and although it wasn't really expensive until a couple of decades ago, but going through that system to get into the position there and try and help the world and help society through that. And they a lot of it is, so it's like an alcoholic drink. What you were saying before, as far as the amount of control and this dynamic between them getting a portion of it, the compartmentalization, and as well as the power and force exerted upon them to silence them and pressure them into submission to going along with this. It's light on the restriction of the knowledge and truth and pleasure. It's a game of pleasure or true power, and basically pleasure and artificial power, or discipline and self-denial and true power and knowledge or spiritual power. And that's the game. By it's basically higher consciousness beings or interdimensional beings that run these groups, these shows, and it's heavy on the enforcement and control aspect. The power is baseline, the default, fundamental basis of it is power over the human mind and the human population to whatever degree, and manipulation of the human mind and whatever give there is in the personality, whatever susceptibility, naivety. And so that way it is by default going to hit an overage of security, control, dominance, like a militant, like cult following that is beyond the level of a cult. It's like a society, a culture at that point, and or secret society. And at the it will err in the side of people having less control, if you will, and less power, with too much knowledge, and to the point of having their mind liquefied with the things that have happened, to the amount of corruption of, like cannibalism being an aspect of our culture that has always been a percentage of our population, but we simply never knew. And to that degree, and to having, causing like genetic aberrations in our species, to the point of that mixing with power and technology, to the point of altering, time and history in ways we couldn't really imagine through these experiments. And to the point of these, okay, so the Adjustment Bureau and what is it, Men in Black and things like that, where the ultimate situation is basically non-human entities doing that, whether they were created in an underground base as part of these experiments with putting together these corrupted life forms and genetic hybrids to bring about a kind of what would look like a demon or something like that. And it is some type of, what people call grays and things like that, which I know one version of them is designed and 100% programmed and controlled by a certain group, and or the shadow, groups themselves. And whether there's more beyond that, I really can't say and don't know. But it gets kind of weird as to what exists and where and how and when it exists when we look into what's beyond the physical plane, because it goes into virtual and environments and experiences that are like dreams that merge, dreams into collective dreams that everyone has, no matter where you are, kind of dead or alive. And it gets really weird from there. This larger universe that incorporates life and death equally. But that stuff goes on, and ultimately it's the strangest thing, but it's like it's been happening for so long that when you begin to expose a person to these elements, it's as if some innate power overtakes people, and they either rise above it and overcome it and become, somebody, in a way exalted by that, or it's as if something clicks on in us to make us forget it and shut us off from being able to interact. And it's beyond paralysis through fear, because if you've ever been around a big animal, there's this sense of like it eats things my size, like this like apex predator in some foreign environment or something. And there's that's a psychic sense of an animal, a dog or a lion, or something territorial. And it's almost almost like if you were to see a bully or something like that, or just a very dull-witted person and aggressive, you can kind of get the psychic sense of like, oh, this is what they're about. Well, it's very plain with an animal or something like that, and even the it can get more complex, but that's the basis of their existence. Get more complex with another animal. I don't want to say an owl, but an owl comes to mind as far as bird-like species or less territorial and combative. But the idea is that psychic sense, okay, it's manipulated in these entities, mainly these programmable entities, but as well, essentially every type of non-human entity that I can come across, whether it's a virtual entity that is only in these computer systems, or a programmed entity difficult to understand is these entities that exist in our subconscious, our collective unconscious, and are like demigods because of the belief and the empowerment we give to them through our history and through our ancestry and things like that, and ultimately our ancestors as the ultimate cosmic entity, if you want to call it that, and ourselves as a multidimensional being through that, through one another. But and regardless, so basically what I'm trying to say is that there's the physical entities, and they incorporate a weaponized psychic sense that can initiate a paralysis stronger than the person's ability to overcome that until they've been able to. They have to go through training to be able to do that, and that the higher you go into this spectrum of entities, you get more and more that the entity is a psychic being, a psychic entity instead of a physical entity. And that's kind of where I'm hinting, is that there's a mix between the human as a being who's purely physical and some essence of life in the human that is capable of being an entirely psychic entity and existing in all, like energy fields or states or maybe frequencies. I really don't know how to put it that way, but succinctly, but that's what it is. And that's a good thing because we're all capable, but it doesn't mean to say I think ET's going to float down on a cloud and either save us all or give us all anything beneficial or even exists outside of our own perception, or maybe that there is such a being, but it's the same. It's that being is in the same place, or at least is met through the same place as the beings in your own mind, and that your own mind creates a portion of the larger being in itself. So you said something about the super warrior system and those individuals, and most of those names are involved, and just look into their information because it's accurate, and they're part of similar programs, or some of them the same exact program. Only a few are involved in the program you mentioned. It has to do with ancient history and cloning, hybrid bloodlines, royal blood, knowledge of that system, which is ultimately this AI matrix system of entities that are programmable and pretty much edit time and edit consciousness, just like the Adjustment Bureau or the Men in Black. Like I said, basically, these are the original beings that were doing it thousands of years ago before we even knew what was going on. But the strange thing is the way it works, there's the ones that knew of humanity were already in a time-locked civilization where those beings never existed. So it gets really weird and mixed up. Basically, the way it goes in or out is the beings that began it came from another timeline, and the beings that solved it come from another timeline. I don't really know how that gets that way, but it has to do with lucidity and the virtual matrix, and shadow soldiers, and soul experiments, soul splicing, fragmentation. Project Ibis is very is a powerful information, along with Project Mannequin and Phoenix and all these. And
Man, I think it was like the British monarch. I think I was the only person I know I was the only person to focus for years on the super soldier program, and I put all of them that I could find, from David Morrow to Alara and James Rink and everybody, in one group, Sarah and Max, in one group for years, and I tried to compare and contrast all the aspects of their story to understand not only the programs but what was going on with them individually, which was always interesting. I can throw you in that group if you like, but I always like the metaphor sort of laid out by the film Dark City, which was sort of the original Adjustment Bureau. So you have these parasitic alien beings, and they take dead human bodies, they use humans as hosts, but that just forms an elite group that controls the time and space in a giant human experiment where they stop time every night and switch up our memories and switch up our personalities and lives. Dark City used the exact same film set that The Crow and The Matrix did, but it's most interesting because utilizing the same physical space, we're getting the mythology of Dark City and we're getting the mythology of the Matrix. So it's almost like someone wanted us to think of one set or one world or one city, like the Truman Show or whatever, and how it can be manipulated not only from a Gnostic alien perspective, from an artificial intelligence, virtual reality, simulation perspective. And then, of course, the Matrix goes off on its own sort of spiritual elevation from there. So it's like someone wanted to think of wanted us to think of the earth as this place that was not only an experiment being changed and manipulated by aliens, perhaps different aliens, but also a place where our innate physiology could allow us to transcend or travel through these dimensions and then transcend the physical space or the experiment itself. And then, from there, reality is malleable via will, whether you're following the rules of magic with a K or whether you're just watching the Matrix and taking it a little too seriously. But moving on real quick, do you think that D-Wave and advanced AI and CERN factor into the curriculum of what you're saying about these different timelines and dimensions? And we're almost out of time, so I'll just throw this in here. The Mandela effect, do you think that that's also part of, or how would you explain the manipulation that may be happening there?
You have to read the blog and whatever else you can. D-Wave is the first computer that could handle petabytes of information, or at least the first supercomputers that came out were, and that's required for the recording and transfer of basically a live virtual uplink of human consciousness, which is like trash. You could describe, a very limited amount of information in petabytes. It's just, I didn't believe it for the longest time, but that's all you need. Fairly moderate-sized corporation can get enough power and information to run human clones and virtual and digital clones. Just on the list of topics I sent you that I've gotten to like 3 lines of. Nightly mind wiping from what was it, Dark City. All these are soft disclosure. Each one is just 1 page of a chapter of many chapters in a book. Nightly mind wiping. Apparently, something goes on with the moon as the moon passes over. That's why it was installed for a monthly, time editing of the continuum here, whatever you want to call it, and there's some strange effect that's apparently bounced back into orbit every certain amount of days because it is a foreign object at the weight it is, and the supposed gravity or the size of the planet, the mass. It would have spiraled off by now, out of control, and it's apparently edited, or it's intelligently manipulated, corrected, if you will, and that has something to do with this AI system that has been running this AI grid, this soul swapping, splicing grid. And apparently the strange thing here that I'm telling you is that apparently it happens each night because information is edited out that is brought in from the psychic body from outside of the physical dimension. If you meet ancestors or any type of contact with the truer version of yourself that goes so far beyond your perception, it's edited out apparently. The Matrix, then it goes into 13th floor and virtual realities instead of just an AI or at least a dungeonist